and welcome to another video by George's Shed, and today we're going to be building this gaming PC. Let's get started. First of all, we have the case. This cost me £20 and was brand new. This was one of the cheapest ones, and it even came with LED strips. Next we have the motherboard, which I won on auction for £24. This was used, second hand but never used. Next we have the CPU, which is an AMD A8 5600K, clocked at 3.6 GHz quad core, and I got this for a very reasonable £24. Next we have the CPU cooler, which is nothing special, just a standard cooler for an FM2 Plus motherboard, which was just £12. Next we have the graphics card, which is a used GTX 750 with 1GB of GDR5 memory, which was £60. Next for storage we have an SSD, which was £40, 160GB, and a 1TB hard drive from a previous PC. So next we have the power supply, which is a 250 watt Dell power supply from an old computer as well. So here's the RAM. This again is out of an old computer, and this is 8GB of DDR3 memory. Okay, so first of all, obviously what we need to do is take the side of the case off. So this is just as it is with most cases, two screws on the back of the case. Most of the time they'll have an outer knob on, so you can unscrew it by hand, but if not, then you might need a screwdriver. Once you've undone them, the side of the case should just slide off easily. So there is the inside of our case. Once you've opened the case, then you need to look inside and see if these little motherboard standoffs are pre-installed. So these are little brass pillars that you'll see on the base of the case. If not, then most likely they'll be in a bag of screws, and you'll need to attach them in the configuration for your motherboard. So at this point, what you need to do is make sure that you put in the back plate of the motherboard. Because if you don't do this now, then you've got to disassemble half the system to get it in if you do it towards the end. So this should come with the motherboard if it's new or second hand. Just make sure it has it, or you'll end up either not having one or have to buy one. So there should be a slot in the back of the case, which that should just firmly push and click into. So once that's installed, then you need to install your power supply. So here is the power supply. So a case will either have the power supply at the top or at the bottom in most cases. And check that the mounting holes are in the right place for your power supply or case before you buy either of the components, because they might not fit. So in this case, the power supply goes at the top, like that, and then you just push it back, and all the holes should line up. So now you need to get some screws and screw it in. Okay, so now our power supply is installed. I'm now going to install the motherboard. So the best way to do this is to try and push all the cables out of the way, so either have them hanging out of the case or push them just out of the way as you put it in, and then push the I/O into the I/O shield first. Which can be difficult to line up, and then once you've done that, you can push the back down. And now you can install the screws to attach the motherboard to the case. Now that our motherboard is installed, I'm now going to install the CPU. So here's our CPU, and before you put it in, it's a good idea to make sure none of the pins are bent if it's an FM2 or FM2 Plus CPU. And then you need to push down on this handle and then it'll spring up. And then this is the really important bit. There should be a little arrow printed on the plastic socket case, and this indicates which way around the socket goes. So in this case the arrow's here, so this needs to align with the arrow on the CPU. And anyway, in this case, if you tried to put it in the wrong orientation, the pins wouldn't fit in, so it just wouldn't go in, or if you tried to force it in, then it'd damage it. So it should just gently fall down into those pins, and then you can slowly push down on this lever and then hook it under the retaining clip. And there is our CPU installed. Okay, so now we have installed our CPU, we also need to install the heatsink, because the CPU without a heatsink would not last very long, and I'd be surprised if it even got past the Windows loading up. So here's our lovely CPU cooler, as you saw earlier. So this CPU cooler has heatsink compound already attached to it. Although not all of them will have this. In fact, I think most probably won't. So you may have to buy some CPU heatsink spread, which isn't very expensive. You can normally get like a small amount of it, which is enough for one CPU for about £1 or £2. Okay, so the way we install this is this motherboard already had these two heatsink mounts. You need to make sure that your CPU cooler is compatible with those mounts. So you can see there's two hooks here, and then there's two hooks on the cooler. So how we do this is one hooks over the one side of the hook like that, and then you need to push it down and then get the other hook attached. So this can be quite difficult to do. So there we go, that's now attached. So now our heatsink won't set on fire if you try and run anything on it. So once we've done that, we now need to plug in the CPU fan into the CPU fan header. So this is normally located somewhere near the CPU, and it should just line up and plug in quite simply, although here it's quite a small gap. So there we go, that is now plugged in, and our CPU is and the CPU heatsink is now complete. Okay, so now we've installed the heatsink. What we need to do is install the RAM. So here I have one stick of 8GB RAM. So you need to look at your motherboard's manual and you need to see which slot is slot number 1 if you've only got one slot of RAM. If you've got two sticks, then it doesn't matter, you just put them in two. So here I know that the one that's closest to the edge of the motherboard is slot 1. So you need to make sure both the tabs are open. You need to slot the RAM in and then firmly push down on each side until it clicks like that. And now our RAM is installed. Okay, so now we've installed the heatsink. What we need to do is install the RAM. So here I have one stick of 8GB RAM. So you need to look at your motherboard's manual and you need to see which slot is slot number 1 if you've only got one slot of RAM. If you've got two sticks, then it doesn't matter, you just put them in two. So here I know that the one that's closest to the edge of the motherboard is slot 1. So you need to make sure both the tabs are open. You need to slot the RAM in and then firmly push down on each side until it clicks like that. And now our RAM is installed. Okay, so now our RAM is installed, we're going to move on to the DVD drive. So this computer has panels of mesh in the front covering the slots, so these should just pop out easily like that. So once we've popped how many slots you want to remove, then you can get your DVD drive and push it in to there like that. Now that's in, we can screw it in. Okay, so now our DVD drive is installed. We now need to add our storage. So first of all, I'm going to add the 1TB hard drive. So I'm going to put this one in that slot there. And then we can use some screws to attach it in. And you also need to bear in mind that when you do these screws in like this is only doing one side, so we're going to have to flip the case over to put the screws in the other side. So this requires removing the screws holding the back of the case off, and then we can remove that panel, flip the case over, and now we have access to the back of the case where we can put in the other two screws for our DVD drive and our hard drive. Now our main storage drive is installed, we can now install our SSD. So as you may be able to notice, that this does not fit in there because it's not the same size as the hard drive. So I've had to print these two mounts which converts the size of this into the size of that so that it can fit in. So first of all I've got to put in the screws and then we need to attach it in. Okay, so now we've attached all the screws and we now have this lovely adapter attached to the SSD. We can now slot this into the next slot up from the hard drive, and then repeat the process for the hard drive by attaching the screws. Okay, so now our SSD is securely attached. Okay, so now we've attached all the screws and we now have this lovely adapter attached to the SSD. We can now slot this into the next slot up from the hard drive and then repeat the process for the hard drive by attaching the screws. Okay, so now our SSD is securely attached. Okay, so finally, to complete this build, we need to put in our graphics card. I don't need this graphics card in this system because the CPU does have a graphics card inbuilt into it. So now we just need to slot this in, but it's not necessary, so you don't need one with this system, but I want a little bit extra performance. I mean, this graphics card probably isn't going to stay in here that long because it's quite an old one. So, yeah. So you need to remove, this is a dual slot graphics card, so you need to remove this covering thing on the, covering one of the slots. So these are held on with little tabs, and these can be broken simply by bending it backwards and forwards so the metal fatigues and breaks. So the graphics card is installed by placing it into the graphics card slot and then pushing down firmly so it slots down into its location. So then, to complete the installation of the graphics card, we need to put in a screw to hold it in. So this one has one single screw in the middle, and I've just dropped a screw into the case. But if you ever drop a screw into the case, then you need to make sure you find it, because it could be shorting out some components and could ultimately blow up your new computer. Okay, the screw has been found. I found it by simply tipping upside down the case, giving it a jiggle until the screw fell out. So in goes our screw. And now our graphics card is securely attached to our computer. So now we need to attach all of the cables. So your motherboard manual can help with this. So here is the manual that came with mine. But most of the time, all of the connections you need are handily labelled. So first of all, we will start off with our USB ports. So in goes USB 1. Like that. And then here we have the hard drive LED. So here I need the manual, and then we can find out where it goes and then plug it in. Okay, so here it is in the dark, so you can see all the LEDs lighting up. So it's got 2 LED strips, tubes on the side, and then a red LED fan in the middle. So here's the inside of the PC, which looks just as good on the outside with a little bit of cable management. So it looks just as good as any gaming PC that you could buy, but for a third of the price.